we do. And though it's temporary, feeling sad can be so scary. I love the ones who understand me. I never wanna feel so angry. I never wanna feel like this again.
Welcome to the 603 Stories Podcast, a monthly mental health podcast made by young adults for young adults, where we share stories, make connections, and find hope. Any ads throughout this podcast are not associated with 603 Stories or the 603 Stories Podcast. There will be sensitive subjects discussed during this podcast. Should you need them, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255, or you can text the crisis text line by texting 741-741.
Welcome to 603 Stories, a podcast made by and for young adults, where we explore mental health and work to help others make connections, get help, and find hope. I'm Heather Morris, a 24-year-old New Hampshireite, and I am your host.
And I'm your other host, Jace Troie, and I'm 23 years old and also from Southern New Hampshire. May is Children's Mental Health Awareness Month, so for this episode of 603 Stories, we're going to be focusing on a story about navigating mental health and mental health resources as a family. But before we dive in, we want to remind everybody that we are not mental health professionals. We are just passionate young adults who care about everyone's mental well-being.
So with that, let's get on with the story.
Today we have some special guests with us. Grace and Sarah are here to talk with us about what it has been like living with a family member that has mental illness. So Grace and Sarah, would you like to give us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. So as you said, my name's Sarah. I'm a mom. We live on the seacoast of New Hampshire. We've been here for about almost 20 years. And our family's comprised of myself, my husband, and then 3 children. Sam, who's almost 24, Grace, who's here with us today, who's 19, and then the youngest is Jack, who is 16. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Grace. I'm 19. I'm a college student. I am studying social work and neuroscience, and I've been doing a lot of work with mental health advocacy through my school and through numerous different organizations in the state. And
I should add that I also work in the mental health field. I have for a little over 25 years.
Nice. Well, thank you for all you do in the mental health field. So, which family member is it that struggles with mental illness?
That would be my son, Samuel, and he is home. He lives at home with us now, but he is actually doing very, very well. But it's been quite a journey for Sam and for the entire family. Which I would say it began when he was about a sophomore in high school, when we really noticed and Sam noticed some signs and symptoms. So, it's been about 6 years of a lot of ups and downs, and just each of us experiencing the process differently, and somehow, coming together to get through it and to get to this place where we are today, where he is actually doing really well. So obviously Grace and I have different perspectives, mine from the perspective of a mother and Grace's from a perspective of a sibling.
Grace, if you would like to kind of jump in and tell us where this all started and the first big pivotal moment where you realized it was different.
Okay. Samuel started showing symptoms when he was 15 years old. He began with showing symptoms of depression, isolation, frequent, not really hanging out with friends anymore, staying home a lot, not participating in things he used to participate in, such as like he was a 3-season athlete, a runner, not showing as much interest in that anymore, and failing grades, all the kind of telltale signs of something's going on, and that kind of alerted us that something was different with him. Sam was always a quiet kid. He had a lot of friends, but he was an introvert. He kept to himself, but the isolation was not like him. So the first big sign that something was different, my mom came home one day from work and found Sam sitting in a room all in the dark, alone, crying. And he just told her, he was like, "I'm so sad and I can't really explain why." And from there, that's when kind of we knew that we had to intervene somehow.
And I, just to jump in on that at that time, Grace and her younger brother, were significantly younger. So they didn't really, know what was going on. And what I immediately did was just reach out to his primary care doctor. And then we got a therapist and a psychiatrist just for medication evaluation. So it was very much, okay, I could see you're having a problem. I think this is depression. We can work on this. And we did. And he definitely, with the help of therapy and trying some medication, he did improve. And we kind of saw him perk back up and come back to the Sam that we knew. And from there, as we said, this started in 10th grade. So from 10th to 12th grade, it was just, I sort of call it the crisis years, because we didn't really know what was we weren't really sure, is some of the stuff that we're experiencing, like with substance misuse, is this what typical teenager experiences, or is this something more? And we tried to work with the school. We did filed a chins because we wanted some more mandatory help with like drug testing and stuff.
Could you explain to our listeners real quick just what a chins is?
Sure. So a chins, and of course now I'm not going to remember what it stands for. What the acronym is. Basically, and there's voluntary chins, and then there's more an involuntary chins where you have a juvenile probation officer. Ours was voluntary. So we actually went to the police and said, "Can you help us?" And then someone was appointed to provide in-home therapy to us, and Sam had to have drug testing, and it was sort of holding him accountable. But the approach that I did like about it was that it was also mandatory family counseling, and I think that was just a resource for us that helped, and it included and Grace and Jack got to participate in that as well, because as I said, they weren't fully clued into what was going on, but they obviously, even as young children, could see there were behaviors that were going on, and there was a lot of chaos at home. We didn't find the school to be extremely helpful, to be honest. I think what they saw was, well, geez, he's still coming to school, and he's still on the cross country team, and he's still getting passing grades. What's the problem? But no one knows their kid better than the family. And so I think that was frustrating at the time. The other thing that was frustrating was we had had an incident at home where he abruptly ran away, and as he was running away, made a suicidal statement. So it was terrifying. He was missing in the woods for several hours. We contacted the police. They had the K-9 unit. They were going door to door. It was very dramatic and terrifying for us. He was eventually located, but he had some injuries from being in the woods with no shoes, etc. And when he was located, a police officer, actually it was a state trooper, came into my driveway and said to me, they're going to IEA him for this. They're going to involuntarily hospitalize him for this. And fortunately, I know my resources and was able to correct him and say, actually, that's not true. He's going to go and he's going to have an evaluation, and then it will be determined what he needs. And he was it was a really negative experience for me. Just not compassion, not trying to, provide any comfort, support, resources. I'm happy to say that approach, we've definitely seen change over the years, and us having to have contact with law enforcement. It's greatly improved. And I think that's just because there's been more training available to law enforcement. So.
Could we hear a little bit about, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I was just going to ask, at what point or how far into symptom onset was this happening with Sam? And did you have a firm diagnosis at that point? Right. And also, if you did have a firm diagnosis, how do you feel like that affected the police interaction or how it was approached?
Yeah, so as I said, we kind of call those the crisis years. So Sam was able to graduate. He actually graduated early because in school, he found the setting was too much for him. It was too anxiety provoking. And we didn't want to go along with that, but we did, because we could see he was distressed, and it certainly wasn't helping him. He did graduate early, and he was accepted to the colleges he applied. He was accepted with an academic scholarship. So a lot of good things were there, but he was not ready, and we knew that, and we did not push it. So when he was 18 and a half, we were at the lowest point. He had lost significant weight, wasn't getting out of bed, and we went and told him, this is it. Either you come with us cooperatively, or we're going to call an ambulance to bring you in. And he said he'd go. We got to the emergency room, and I call this the worst day of my life, but it was also the beginning of finally getting the help that we needed. And I'll be honest, I brought him in. I sat alone in the parking lot for 2 hours, calling his cell phone, wanting to tell him, it's okay, we can leave. I'll take you out. We'll try something else. But it didn't work, because he didn't even have his phone. They'd taken it away from him. But that was his first of 12 inpatient admissions over the next 4.5 years. And after about the third admission, several diagnoses had been tossed around. There was major depression. There was bipolar disorder. There was, but because he was abusing substances such as psychedelics and marijuana, they said, we're not going to be able to give you a really straight diagnosis until he's, clean and sober for 8 months. And I thought, well, 8 months, like, how are we ever going to get 8 months? And I don't think we really ever did get 8 months. But that being said, after these multiple hospitalizations, finally, the diagnosis that they came to was schizoaffective disorder, depressed type. Along with that, he did also carry the cannabis use disorder, and depending on what other things he was using, they would throw that in there as well. But I have to say that I do agree with the diagnosis. But it was really, really hard to hear.
Could you give us a brief summary of what that diagnosis entails? Specifically,
Sure.
like the depressed type versus.
Yeah. Grace will give that actually.
So schizoaffective disorder, depressed type is categorized as a psychotic illness. To break it down, it is essentially schizophrenia combined with a mood disorder. So the symptoms of schizophrenia, such as delusions, hallucinations, as well as symptoms of a mood disorder. So in his case, depressed type. So symptoms of depression. And it's essentially all those kind of combined into one diagnosis. So for him, when it comes to his diagnosis, because it's such an individual thing, anybody who has sort of a psychotic illness, it's such an individual thing in the sense that, you get a diagnosis and you're told, it's delusions, hallucinations, and things like that. But, in Sam's case, he really only experienced the delusions and the depressive symptoms. He had his moments with hallucinations, but it was really more of the sort of intrusive thoughts that didn't really have explanation behind them, so like being convinced of something that isn't actually true, increased paranoia and severe paranoia, and then symptoms of severe depression, just having very, very low points and kind of being stuck in those low points.
Yeah, and I think the social piece for Sam is a big part of his diagnosis. And, we never wanted him to feel like just because a doctor or several doctors have said, this is what we think you have, we've never wanted him to feel like that he has to be identified by that label, because as Grace said, every diagnosis is experienced differently by every person. Not everyone with bipolar disorder has the same symptoms. And the thing that was helpful to us was it gave us a direction for treatment. And that's really what we needed, because with treatment there was hope. And so that's really when we kind of went on this roller coaster ride of, he had over the course of the year, 7 outpatient therapists, 3 different psychiatrists, 19 different medication trials. He did 10 weeks of ECT, which was really electroconvulsive therapy, which was as a very last resort treatment after he made a suicide attempt.
I think to add to the whole I'm so sorry. To add to the electroconvulsive therapy component, I think that, so when this came about, we were at a point where we really felt like we didn't have any other option. And we had tried everything, we had tried all the different medications, or Samuel had, and he had tried all these different therapists and all these different, routes. And along that path, he also tried all these different, holistic treatments. So, he tried Reiki, he tried cranial sacral stuff. He tried, he got really into herbs and teas and kind of like trying to make his own remedies with that, self-medicating with these more natural things, crystals, astrology, tarot, all those kind of, he really out came like this really spiritual side of him.
And I think we always wanted to support him in that, with sort of traditional medicine and all of these other alternative therapies, we were open to anything.
Of course.
So we didn't turn it down, but I have to say it was really hard. I mean, his dad and I, a lot of that we didn't understand. We're from a different generation. A lot of that was new for us. So, we would butt heads at times, but ultimately it would come down to, okay, if you think this is going to help, let's go for it.
I think with that as well, you were not, my mom comes from a background of, working in mental health for 25 years. But going along with her career, she's also seen a lot of different treatments that work different for everybody. And electroconvulsive therapy was always one that we were always kind of like hesitant towards, because, there's so much stigma surrounding it. You see these representations of it, like in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where it's just deemed as this really terrifying experience for someone, and it's kind of just like a numbing thing for the patient. And I think having Sam go through that gave us a lot more hope in the treatments that are coming out nowadays. It's terrifying to think that your child is, for me, my sibling is going to be going, under anesthesia and to endure this treatment that will essentially rewire his brain, change his brain chemistry. But when you don't have any other option, it's like you're willing to try anything. And I think that, there's so much stigma surrounding it, but it is one of those things that I don't think we would be where we are today had Sam not gone through that treatment. It was not, there's parts of it that were not, not enjoyable, like one of the side effects is severe memory loss. And so, after the treatment, he lost a lot of his memories from his younger years, which was really difficult. But he also had a lot of relief from what he had, from the turmoil in his brain.
It kind of put things on pause, and then he was able to kind of regroup. And to put it in perspective, since the ECT, he's only had 2 hospitalizations. So he went, 12 total, but only 2 in the last 2 years. So that's huge. And but I always like to say, Sam's the bravest person I've ever known, because, and he's also, I mean, there's lots of things we love about him, but he's brave, and he's fought. He's had to fight, probably every day for the last 6 years. And these treatments, not just the ECT, but medications have just, wreaked havoc on him in terms of side effects. And, for me as a mom, I want, you have a certain vision of your kid and in their future, and but to see your child, having to vomit every morning because of the side effect of a medication, or be so sluggish that they can't go and hang out with their friend and play a video game because they're too exhausted, or to rapidly, for a man, a young man who's 6 feet and always been slim, gained 30 pounds, and he's doing all these things to live. He's at a point, when he had the suicide attempt, we were at a point where it was like, okay, this is something he can die from. And he made the choice to keep fighting. So we're very lucky, because not all families get that. And we also don't take it for granted that, medications can stop working. They can. And not only that, I mean, for Sam, one of his biggest challenges has even just been accepting that he has a diagnosis. And I think when he finally was able to realize that he has this chronic condition that needs treatment, that needs, care, was when things started to fall into place and really start working.
Now, it's extremely evident that you two have so much love for Sam. I'm interested to hear, like, how do you feel like the crisis years impacted your family dynamic, impacted you as individuals, as well as like your relationship to Sam directly?
I think for me, it has made me kind of hypersensitive to Sam in particular, but also, the people around me. Mm-hmm. I'm always, when I'm around Sam, I'm constantly thinking about, like, what could I say that could, because another thing about Sam, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with his mental illness, this is just him. He's just a very, very sensitive person, and he's very empathetic. He will take on anyone's emotions around him. He like soaks it up like a sponge. So, I'm constantly thinking about, like, what am I going to say that could, conjure a certain emotion for Sam? Like
you don't want to set him off, kind of.
Yeah, set him off, like trigger him.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just very sensitive to kind of like the language I use and the things that I, do when I'm around him. And I think that's like the biggest thing for me. And then I think another thing is our family has really, my mom works in the mental health field. I'm studying social work. I'm going into the mental health field as well. I'd really like to be a nurse, but for the time being, I'm studying social work. And it's really made me, it's brought up this whole new sensitivity for me, for not only Sam, but the people around me. I'm always thinking about like trying to be sensitive to the people around me and like what they're going through. And I think it has also made our family much more sensitive to each other as a group, you know, as like a family dynamic. We're all very, because not just, you know, my mom works in mental health, I'm studying it, but we've all sort of gathered that sense of like understanding of mental health. We all are constantly, because we've been through it, we're all constantly looking out for it.
I think though that, you know, we want to be real, you know, we want, you know, talking about this, we want to be real, and that there were periods of time that were hell at our house. I mean, they really were. We've had holes punched in the walls. We've had the police at our doors. We've had, you know, like bloodshed. And my husband and I did marriage counseling because it, you know, our approach to managing the stress is so different. And, you know, in just observing Grace and then Jack, who, you know, and Jack is often the forgotten one in this, and which I certainly don't want, but I think we tried to protect him a lot because they're so, you know, when Sam was 16, Jack was only 8. So, but he heard a lot, which is the key, is he heard a lot and he absorbed that. And now, you know, there are lots of things that continue to come out about how he was affected, and, you know, definitely resentment, anger, you know, attention was taken away from him. And of course, you know, Grace, we worry that she has taken on too much, you know, and how about not being a caregiver? How about just being able to be a sister? So I think these are all ways that, you know, our family as a unit, but individually. And of course, me as a mom, I've thought a million times, what did I do wrong? You know, is this something I did? I thought I was doing everything, you know, a good mom should do. And I think all those things are normal after I've participated in support groups and attended, you know, mental health advocacy trainings and such. I've learned, you know, geez, these are all sort of common threads that families go through.
And sadly, I think a lot of that can be boiled down to stigma as well. We're taught in this society that this isn't something that we talk about, and we're taught that if there's anything going on within a family, like it's the family's business and it's behind closed doors. And because of that, we don't hear these stories of other people who are going through this. So
right.
I think it's so important that you're sharing your story right now and giving people hope at the end of the day. But could you go into a little bit more detail about how the stigma of this mental illness has impacted your family? And more specifically, I know Grace and I had talked at another point about language and stigmatizing language and how it's used, especially in our generation, the 18 to 27-year-olds, how we use language in a way that might hurt people without realizing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, for stigma, I have so many examples of, part of it was I was afraid to talk about it because I was afraid of how people would treat us. I was afraid people wouldn't let Jack and Grace have friends over to visit for play dates because of what they had heard as rumors going on with Sam. So, you know, in a way, I was guilty of falling into the stigma as well, until I finally got the courage to start speaking openly and publicly about it. But even with our own extended family members, there was a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of using terminology that we find offensive, and it's just sort of pervasive throughout everything.
Was there anything specific that changed or happened that, prompted you to be more open?
Well, the first thing that happened was I attended a support group.
Okay.
Which then made my husband and I did it together, and it made us realize how many other people, and it was a Seacoast support group. So there were other parents from, all the area towns. So it made me realize, well, geez, all these people are having similar experiences. And, if my son was going through cancer treatment, I wouldn't just probably not ever share that with anyone. It would probably be out there. There'd be like a GoFundMe, or somebody would be, there'd be a meal train. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that happened was Judge Broderick came to our high school and did one of his talks. And I sat there, and at the time, Sam happened to have been in the hospital. So my husband and I sat there in the audience, and I just had tears pouring down my face listening to him share his story and be so vulnerable, talking about his son, harming him in a mental health crisis. And I kept whispering to my husband, I want to say something. And he said, go for it. And I did. And I just raised my hand and I said, well, I have something to share. And I, in like 2 minutes, shared what we were going through. And after that, we were swarmed by a crowd of other parents, either thanking us or just giving us a hug or saying, I have a sibling, I remember one woman saying, my brother has bipolar disorder. I know, I understand. And then from there, it was empowerment. So I think that's really what happened. And then we brought it home, and both our kids have
for myself,
gone for it.
For myself as well, I spent so many years, because this all began when I was young. I don't even know. I was like, how old?
Well,
like
11.
10, 11 when this began. And, I kind of had to teach myself to go into every day pretending that my brother hadn't had an episode that night or the night before and was in the hospital. I had to, go into school, put a smile on my face, and just kind of go with that I was fine. And I can remember one day when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I had always I'd had occasional panic attacks, but there was one day where I can remember so vividly, my brother, the police had been in my house the night before, and I really didn't have any sort of outlet. I didn't have any way to kind of process what had occurred at my house and kind of the whole situation. And I went to school, and I was, had a smile on my face, just like kind of going with the flow, pretending that I was fine. And I hit the cafeteria, and I was sitting at my lunch table with my normal friend group, and I ate my entire 30-minute lunch. I ate in silence, and everybody around me talked, and I just sat in silence, eating my sandwich. And the end of lunch, my friend looked at me and she said, "Hey, are you okay? You're not really talking." And it was like it flipped a switch, and I had the biggest panic attack of my life right in the middle of the cafeteria. She had to take me up to counseling, and right then and there I started talking to the guidance counselor at my school and telling her what I had been going through. And I hadn't had the opportunity to really talk to anyone other than my family about what I had been going through at home. So I find when I got that opportunity, it was like a waterfall just like flowing out of me, just everything, all these emotions. And I was in that counseling office for the rest of the school day because I just had so much to say and so many different emotions. And after that, I remember I said to him, I'd spoken to the guidance counselor, and there were a few other people who were in the guidance office, students, and I talked to them. And that day, I remember I was like, you know what? I just talked to someone about this, and it was fine. They were really, receptive towards me. They didn't understand, but they heard me. Something in social work that we're taught is to not really use the language like I understand when someone's telling you something, to instead say like I hear you or I'm listening or something, to kind of validate them, but not say that you know what they're going through, because in reality nobody knows exactly what someone else is going through. And I really felt that day. And I think from then on, that's when I really kind of got the courage to start speaking up to like my peers about it. And then from then on, it just like the crowds, the like groups I would talk to about it just grew and grew and grew. And then I just wanted to do more and more with it.
And that's a wonderful example of how we can use language positively in order to help in a situation, as opposed to using that stigmatized, more negative language. Have you ever been personally, I guess, irritated by language negatively being used?
Yes. I think so. Language is such a interesting, concept. It's something that, something that we always said, or like is always like, not we always said, something that's always we always hear is like, people, like kids learn what they say from their parents, they learn their language, they learn like certain things from their parents. And I think that has a lot to do with the language aspect. There have been a lot of situations where I've been around people and they've used words that are sensitive to me, and it's really bothered me. So I can remember one instance where somebody used the word psychotic, and to me, I just like looked at them and I was like, I'm pretty sure I just said straight to them, I don't like that word. Can you pick a different word? Like I think I hit a certain point where it was no longer like someone would say it and I could just brush it off. I hit a certain point where I was like, no, this is something that needs to change, I'm not just gonna like let the community around me use this language that is no longer that can be so harmful to people around them and they don't even realize it. So I started
she would come home from school sometimes and be so frustrated with her peers.
I remember one day with Jack, he came home from school one day and he was so upset. Jack is very sensitive. The two boys, they're just very sensitive, but he came home from school that day and he was so upset. And we were like, what happened? And he was like, my teacher used the word, my teacher called something psychotic and it made me really upset. And I don't think we did anything about it. I don't think we, I think he said something to the teacher.
I don't remember, but what it was, the teacher had called herself a psycho.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And and he was only in like 6th or 7th grade. But the fact is that it made an impression on him that's not right. That offended him. It deeply offended him. And he came home and was all worked up about it. So I gave him some tools on how to go back and say something to the teacher.
Could you explain some of those tools?
Well, I just said, sometimes people aren't aware of the meaning behind their words. They're just used to hearing these phrases without really understanding. And also without considering their audience. So I'm sure she said that without thinking, oh, I have a child in my class who has a brother with a psychotic disorder. So, and all it is it's if you understand where people are coming from, then it gives you the strength to be able to kind of to face that. So instead of being angry at her, I said, why don't you go and just explain it to her? And she's probably going to really appreciate you bringing that to her attention and, bringing awareness to it. And she'll probably be much more sensitive with her words. And that's what happened. So.
And it's the same with words like crazy, like it's one thing to say something is crazy, but to call someone like an actual person, that has a whole different meaning. And that's something that, it's one of those words that gets thrown around like every day and people just say it, but nobody really takes the time to think about what the words they're using actually means and how that could affect the people around them. And I think that that's something that since kind of gaining that courage and empowerment from speaking out about Samuel and his experiences, that's something that we have also become more aware of, kind of correcting people. It's not, we don't want to be those people, but at the same time, it's, it's necessary.
Be those people. We need more of them.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Well, you can be that person. It's just it's in how you approach it. And
And honestly, that's how we're going to change the culture. That's how we're going to change the stigma.
Right.
Around.
And that's part of why we're here.
Yeah.
Sharing our stories.
Yeah.
So could you explain to us how grief has been a part of this process? Because a lot of times when families are dealing with mental illnesses, it can cause this feeling of grief. And I feel as though a lot of people kind of struggle with that because the person's still there and the person is still here with you. And so it can cause this kind of like emotional whiplash of, well, I'm happy that they're here, but I'm also very upset at the same time. So I was just wondering if either of you had a similar experience with that.
Sorry.
So this is something that we did talk about prior, and it made me think a lot about it and how it's really impacted us. Prior to the onset of Sam's symptoms, he was, kind of the perfect kid. He didn't get into trouble. He was a good kid. He had lots of good friends, good friends, and he was a 3-season athlete. He got really good grades, high honors.
Very handsome.
That too. And, he had everything going for him. And, after the onset of his symptoms, it was kind of like we had to learn to accept that he wasn't necessarily going to be that perfect person anymore. And that perfect is kind of a relevant statement. Like it's or relative, not relevant award. It's kind of a relative statement, so along with that, we, an example I used was the day that Sam got into his dream college. I can remember we got the acceptance letter and my mom and I opened it before Sam even got home. And I know, and he had my mom and I were freaking out because he had gotten into his dream school, to study environmental science. That's like what we were under the impression of what he wanted, that was what he wanted to do. So and I can remember he walked through the door and we were freaking out, and we showed him the acceptance letter, and he just like no reaction. And from then on, we just kind of had to, we just, it hit us pretty hard because we were like, why aren't you so excited? But then from there, we had to learn, like, okay, he doesn't want to go to college. That's not going to work for him. We are going to have to go with that. I always use the term, I work with elderly and dementia patients, and one of the terms that we learn when we're working with these Alzheimer's dementia patients is the term riding the wave. And basically what it means is that, wherever they're at, you want to meet them there. And the same goes for someone with mental illness. If they're in a, you want to meet them exactly where they are, and not, you don't want to push them to do things that they're not ready for. You want to ride the wave. You want to let them do what they're ready for in the moment. And along with that, you have to give him along with that, you have to learn that also the ideas behind, accomplishments and success are also very relative. Like every individual has their own interpretation of what is success and what is an accomplishment for them. Like for one person, it could be like going to college, but for Sam, a great accomplishment for him is getting up in the morning, taking a shower, and taking care of himself. That's a great accomplishment, because that shows that he's, making progress. And so going along with the whole grief thing, we had to kind of accept that person that he was when he was 15 years old, before he had symptoms, is not the same person as he's going to be now, and that people change and things happen, and you have to ride the wave.
I wanted to say that grief has played a very, very big role in my life as a mom with this experience, and definitely for his dad. And Grace can speak for herself, but for Jack, I think, Jack grieved what he thought a big brother should be, a brother that's going to toss the football with him, is going to play baseball with him. But what's happened is it's just changed. It's changed. And we've learned that is okay. And that's okay. I mean, Jack and Sam love to go, instead of tossing a football or baseball, they love to go poking around antique shops together, because that's more Sam's pace, and that's okay. And they have fun with that. And for me, I didn't even know I was grieving until a friend of mine was listening to me talk and cry, and she used the word, "You're grieving." And I thought, oh my gosh, I am. Like, what I thought for my boy is not what's happening right now. And I don't know if it ever will happen. And then once I finally just accepted, okay, it's not, but what is it that we are going to have and can have? And it's great. I mean, it's like life can be good. It may be different.
Can you explain a bit what your outlook is now versus, more periods of crisis? Like what is your perception of your family, of Sam as an individual, and how has it developed?
Well,
I mean,
he's been so very, very, stable with a couple of little ups and downs over the last 18 months. No hospitals actually, no, it's almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in June. So
on his birthday.
So I think what's changed is that when we we recognize the signs more of maybe when he is falling into a depressive state. And it's almost as if we can kind of catch it before it turns to crisis.
Okay. And so feeling a bit more prepared.
Yes. So we're more prepared, and I don't want to take, like, this isn't just us. This is Sam. Sam knows now. So, he's, just as we've gone through this whole process, of going through stages, so has he. He knows now. He'll say, I very, very appropriately and proactively, he will say, I need to have my medication adjusted.
He uses the phrase, my head hurts. And we say, what do you mean your head hurts? Like physically or mentally? And he goes, mentally.
Yeah.
And then we know.
Yeah. Right.
That's his phrase.
Because if he says physically, then I say, okay, sounds like you have a headache. You're dehydrated. Have some water. So, it's like we've all been in this together. We've come to different, we've kind of arrived or passed through stages each differently, but we're kind of now all at the same place. So for Sam right now, he is extremely independent. I mean, he keeps his own agenda book. He gets up, he showers, he goes for walks and walks and walks every day. He has a part-time job. He is very involved in one of the Seacoast clubhouses, and that has been a godsend for him, having a community and a purpose for getting up and some structure to his day. Sometimes he'll say, I need a self-care day. Mm-hmm. So his awareness is really improved. So I honestly, when I think about Sam's future, I think that there's anything is possible.
Yeah.
I think that when we think about him a few years ago versus him now, we never would have, I think that maybe never is not the correct term, but we were not in the place to think that he was going to get to a point where he would be able to, be independent and, live on his own or have a job, a stable job, or, be able to take care of himself. And I think now that has completely flipped, because now we have reached a point where he's applying for housing, he's applying to live on his own, and he has gotten to a point where he's able to, be independent, to as much of to the level that he's able to be independent. He's still, we're still there for a lot of emotional support for him, but like he's reached a point that a few years ago we probably did not think that he would have.
So really being able to
it gave us a lot of hope.
Yes. And especially like living in like a high pressure society, for anybody, it's hard to acknowledge when you need to take a step back, when you need a break. And of course, like if you have a mental illness or, a physical illness, you need to be far more in tune with that.
Well, you mentioned something on your first podcast that I listened to. And it really, no, it stuck with me because you spoke about college.
Yes.
And I thought, and at the time when Sam was in high school, I mean, it was sort of like there was no other option. That's what you do.
Exactly.
And I got suckered into that because yes, that is what I did. But it's totally what I wanted to do. And nobody made me. But I got, I fell into that. So of course, when you don't, or when your child doesn't do what you think is it's crushing.
Yes.
But now we're just like, you know what? And one thing I love about Sam is he's a minimalist. He really shows you you really only need a handful of things to get by in life and to be content.
Sam could live with just food, his cat, and water, and just the clothes on his back and be perfectly fine.
Maybe some decent shoes for walking, but I mean, And now we just completely accept that, and okay, yeah.
I love to hear this, and I was thinking directly back to the scenario I described in our first episode when I was making that comment about like expectations and success,
right?
And I'm just like overjoyed to hear your family alter expectations and also celebrate what's right in front of you, because success and happiness and thriving looks completely different for every single individual, regardless of what barriers are in front of you.
And that's something beautiful though that we learned. I mean, I'm a 48-year-old woman, and I have learned one of the most valuable life lessons from my child. I don't know that I would have learned that if he hadn't gone through this. I would have just stayed along that path. And it's helped me be a better parent to Jack and Grace.
And a better, member of society, because you recognize that in everyone around you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just kind of marinating in that thought a little.
See, now someone really listened to your podcast, because I heard that. I listened to the whole thing, and there were so many things that I was just like, oh my gosh. But because what this is doing is like, I had to step back and listen to it from your perspective. Here I am, you're a younger person, and now you're hearing from my perspective as a mother, and
which is huge.
It's different.
It's huge, especially I am the same age as Sam. So I was the child that was going through struggles in diagnosis and navigating school with mental illness, and a huge part of why we wanted to invite you on to speak about it is because it is a family struggle. I mean, whether parents acknowledge it or not, obviously every single dynamic is different. But to hear like how your family stuck by Sam and really unified is really inspiring.
And I think from all of this, I've learned so much about myself as well. Like I've learned like, there's a lot of my mannerisms that are very similar to Sam's, and
yeah, that's a good point though, because we forget though that there's not all of this is mental illness. It's just personality. It's who we are.
I think like the whole college thing, we, when Sam was in high school, we had those expectations, or I'm saying we because we all did, it's what society teaches us is normal. Normal in quotes. But we had to kind of adapt to understand that that's not really the normal for everyone. That's not Sam's normal. And, even for myself, I've learned that that's not really my normal. Like for myself, I've learned that I prefer online school. So, and I think that like that's another thing that I wouldn't really have understood if I didn't kind of watch Sam go through his own self-discovery.
And that makes me think back to like when you were reflecting on Sam being in school and like the school not taking the diagnosis as seriously as they really should have, you know, and offering him the supports that he needed, or accommodations that he needed, because everyone has different learning styles, different, you know, ways that they retain information or interact, or, you know, they need different paces of learning even. And it's so important for us to reflect on that, you know, for everyone, because, you know, we're all kind of thrown into this cookie cutter system where everything's dealt with the same way. And frequently, you know, whether it's in school or at work or just societal expectations, like mental illness, I feel like is either like folks either underreact to it, like, for example, with the school, you know, like saying, well, he's doing fine. So, or they overreact because of that stigma of, you know, the diagnosis, you know, and feeling like, yes, exactly. You know, like the expectation that, you know, folks with mental illness, you know, aren't going to be successful. They're not going to be stable. They're not going to be able to live on their own, or, you know, even like societal, perception that folks with mental illness can be dangerous, which, I know that we talked about it on our prior meeting, and that was something that really sat with me, especially with like stigmatized words like psychotic and crazy.
That's another thing that we always talked about, is like with Samuel, you know,
he's the gentlest,
his mental illness
soul on the planet.
His mental illness carries a lot of negative connotations.
Yes.
You know, like schizoaffective, you know, not many people are familiar with that, but schizophrenia they are. And so like I always break it down when I tell people. I always say it's schizophrenia with a mood disorder, you know, because people are more, they are more familiar with that. But along with being more familiar with that, they're also familiar with the stigma, which is like, you know, you see a lot of really negative representation of people with mental illnesses, like on schizophrenia, TV, on through the media, and it gives these really terrible impressions of individuals that are really suffering. And you know, in a lot of those situations on the media, you know, it's something that you have to recognize is so it's individual. Everybody experiences their mental illness differently,
you know. And one of the things that Sam has learned himself, and you know, and I wish he were a part of this, but he's not quite ready for that. But he is that, you know, he accepts anyone and everyone for who they are. He'll come home and say, oh, I made a new friend today. A gentleman that he met on one of his walks who's a Vietnam veteran, and they just started talking, and Sam considers him a friend. And I think that, you know, that's something that he's learned.
That's something that we can all learn from.
Right. So when it's hard, you know, as a parent, when you hear all these like negative stereotypes, and I'm thinking, really?
Because you're like, if you met Sam, you would be like, you'd be so like baffled by how he does not represent the stigma that surrounds his disorder.
Right.
He's so like,
there's no one standard for
exactly.
There isn't.
There's you know, there's no one size fits all. It's everyone's.
Yes. So we are coming of it to an end, but I want to make sure we take a moment to highlight what are some of the positives. Where, you know, do you see things moving in the future? You know, are there any like big lessons or takeaways that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I think that since this journey all began for us,
Mhm.
there have been some, discouraging times, but there really has been progress made. I mean, it may not be as much as I'd like, or, but there's definitely a better awareness. I think there's more and more happening within the schools, even in hospitals,
Even on my college campus.
yeah, I think we're seeing that more because I think people are talking about it more, and
Yeah.
there have been tremendous resources that have helped me and our family in New Hampshire. I think there can always be more, but I guess since I've had 6-7 years now to really see that there has been progress made, so that's hopeful.
Mhm.
I also think that there are more opportunities for Sam now, because there's becoming more awareness, and I think that we, and as I said earlier, I see anything great in Sam's future. I think anything that he wants to attain, he can. I think that in order to do that, he has to continue treatment.
He has a lot more barriers than what could be considered the typical, like a typical person,
Mhm.
but he can still get to wherever.
Yeah, I think as long as he continues his treatment, which that may evolve and change, but anything's possible. Anything's possible for him.
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Sorry.
Grace.
To add on to that, I think his story has also just left an impact on so many people. He has
a lot of people love Sam.
Oh my God. The people at the hospital love him to another level. And I don't blame them, but he, his story has changed so many people's perspectives. And I think that's so powerful. On my college campus, we have a mental health committee that I am one of the representatives for my class on. And one of the first things we did was, we each, every week during one of our meetings, 2 people would share their stories of their experiences with surrounding mental health and mental illness, and like where their passion kind of came from.
Mhm.
And I shared Sam's story. I know my story took a little bit longer than most other people's, like what they shared, but after I shared his story, I got a message from another student who was on the committee. He's a junior, and he just said, "Thank you so much for sharing. My good friend. Also, my good friend suffers from schizophrenia, and there's so much. I don't want to call them. I think that illnesses such as, anxiety and depression are so much easier to relate to
Mhm.
than, something like schizophrenia and schizoaffective. So this student that reached out to me, he was like, you hear so much about depression and anxiety and, these more understood illnesses, but I've never met someone else that also understands what it's like to be close to someone with something like schizophrenia. And he was just like, you inspired me to share my own story. And when it got to his week, he shared his story about being a friend of someone, and which he wasn't planning on doing in the first place, because he, there's so much negative stigma surrounding schizophrenia and schizoaffective and, psychotic illnesses that, sometimes sharing the story can be really scary because people think things that aren't necessarily true. And
There's so
when
much fear surrounding
there's so much
that
fear surrounding it, and
diagnosis.
so that's something that, you know, sharing Sam's story has given other people the courage to and the strength to share their own story, and that is
Mhm.
such a powerful message. And I think that that goes for anyone who has a story, you know, using your voice to encourage other people and to bring light to these topics that are so, you know, that are difficult to talk about and shouldn't necessarily be difficult to talk about,
Yeah.
is just something that is so powerful and just needs to continue to happen.
And especially because, you know, anxiety and depression is very frequently talked about. Like those are the mental illnesses that are like
Yep.
plastered, you know, everywhere. And it's not because, you know, other mental illnesses aren't common. It is just because it's not being talked about, you know, and through spaces like this, you know, and sharing stories or, you know, sharing stories at school. It creates that network of support that is vital, you know, for success, and for reducing that stigma. So on that note, what would you say for our listeners, for our hosts, for, you know, anyone in general, what can we do to play a part in reducing that stigma? What can we do to support folks like Sam?
I mean, I think, as what I said earlier, you know, meet everyone where they're at, because everybody is in a different place in their life, and you know, there's no one place where you should be in your life. And just accepting people for where they're at and what they have accomplished is just like I think that that's just completely necessary.
Yeah, I would say, you know, accept Sam for who he is and give him a chance.
Give everyone a chance, you know, because there's so many times that Sam is, you know, people underestimate him, and then when they meet him, they're just blown away by him as a person. And you know, don't underestimate these people, because everybody has the same opportunities and the same capabilities. Maybe they have more like barriers and more like things they have to tackle to get to where they need to be, but
And it doesn't make them less worthy.
Exactly.
Doesn't make them less worthy, and to also not to be afraid to ask for help. If you're a family that's struggling with a loved one, and you know, you're not sure what to do or what's going on, you know, to ask for help. There are supports out there. It's just it does, you know, take some effort to get to that, but to not give up. I mean, that's kind of been our family motto is, you know, we're not giving up. Sometimes we felt like it, but no. And recovery is possible, but recovery is fluid. And that is okay.
There are ups and downs.
Yep. And that's okay. So, you know, we gotta ride the wave, and we really do take things less than one day at a time.
And going along with that, don't be afraid to use your voice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, Grace and Sarah, for joining us. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before we come to a close?
Just thank you for having us, and thank you for making, offering this podcast as just another support for people out there.
Thank you for giving us another outlet to share our story and to, encourage other people to use their voice and share their story. And from there, it'll be a ripple effect. You'll get, you'd never know how your story can affect other people and make them want to share theirs.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And thanks, Sam, for us. I really appreciate your family's vulnerability and openness.
We want you to meet him. We should all
I
get
want to meet
together.
him.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
We're,
We'll stay in touch.
Thanks for listening to the 603 Stories Podcast, a monthly podcast made by young adults for young adults. You can check out 603 Stories on Facebook or Instagram, or at our website, 603stories.org. Just a reminder, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline can be reached at 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-TALK. And the crisis text line can be reached by texting to 741-741. Remember, you can make connections, get help, and find hope through 603 Stories.